Wasn't just late, I had been replaced. My mother stood on the porch, suitcase in hand, her expression unreadable as I pulled up. "You're late," she said, glancing at the clock on my dashboard. 6:02 a.m., 2 minutes past our agreed time. I forced a smile, stepping out to help with the luggage, but then I saw her, my sister Serena, dragging her own suitcase down the steps. My smile faltered. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice unnervingly steady. My mom's face was far too cheerful for what she was about to say. "Oh, Celeste, we decided Serena should come instead of you. She's been so stressed lately and she really needs this trip." The words slammed into me. Instead of me. "Mom, I've been planning this for years. I paid for everything." She waved a hand dismissively as if I had pointed out something trivial. "And we're grateful, sweetheart, but you work so hard. You can take another trip later. Serena needs this right now." Serena, of course, didn't even pretend to feel guilty, just smirked, shifting her weight onto one hip. "Thanks for understanding, sis," she said, her voice dripping with false gratitude. My chest tightened as my father shuffled out behind them, suitcase in hand, avoiding my eyes as he placed it at my feet. "This is unbelievable." "This was supposed to be our trip, something special for me to share with you," I said, my voice shaking. My mother only smiled, tone infuriatingly placating. "Well, it still is, just with Serena instead. Don't make this a big deal, Celeste. Your sister really needs a break." My name is Celeste, and for 2 years I had worked overtime, saved every extra penny, and carefully planned every detail of this luxury vacation for my parents. Flights, 5-star hotels, private tours. Every moment was crafted to give them the trip of a lifetime. But standing there in my parents' driveway, watching Serena climb into the backseat of my car, I realized something I'd been avoiding for years. It didn't matter how much effort I put in. Serena would always come first. The sharp retort on the tip of my tongue burned, but I swallowed it down, forcing a tight smile instead. "Let's get going then," I said flatly. If they wanted to prioritize her over me, fine. But I wasn't about to let them enjoy it. The drive to the airport was suffocatingly silent, except for Serena's incessant chatter. "Oh my gosh, Mom, did you see that TikTok about Paris? I cannot wait to go shopping there. Do you think we'll have time for that, or will the tours take up the whole day?" My grip on the steering wheel tightened as I forced myself to stare straight ahead, refusing to react. My mom chuckled. "Of course, sweetie. We'll figure it out when we get there." When we get there, not we, them. They had already erased me from the equation. My father cleared his throat, his voice hesitant. "Thank you for driving us, Celeste. I know this probably feels unusual." I met his gaze in the rearview mirror, my tone ice cold. "Unusual? That's an interesting way to put it, Dad." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, regretting saying anything at all. Serena leaned forward, grinning. "You're not mad, right? I mean, this is really big of you, letting me go. I could never have afforded this on my own." My fingers tightened around the wheel, but I forced a smile. "Of course, Serena. Enjoy the trip." When we pulled up to the airport drop-off zone, my patience was hanging by a thread. I stepped out and started unloading their luggage, each suitcase feeling heavier than it should. My mother reached out, wrapping her arms around me in a half-hearted hug. "Thank you for understanding, sweetheart. This means a lot to us and to Serena," my mom said, her voice full of forced gratitude. I nodded stiffly. "Sure, Mom." Serena flashed a smug smile as she wheeled her suitcase toward the entrance. "Thanks, Celeste. You're the best." I stood there watching them disappear into the terminal, my chest tight with a mix of anger and hurt. The drive home was a blur, my mind replaying the conversation on an endless loop. "This means a lot to Serena. You're not mad, right? You're always working so hard." The words cut deeper with every replay. As soon as I pulled into my driveway, I sat gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Then, without hesitation, I marched into the house, opened my laptop, and logged into every travel account I had used to book their trip. Hotel reservations, canceled, private tours, refunded, airline upgrades, gone. One by one, I dismantled the trip I had meticulously planned for 2 years, my inbox filling with confirmation emails as the weight in my chest began to ease. If they wanted to take Serena instead of me, fine. But they weren't going to enjoy a 5-star vacation at my expense. They could deal with the fallout, let them explain themselves to the hotel staff in Paris. I was done being their doormat. The calls started as soon as their flight landed. My phone buzzed nonstop as I unpacked the suitcase I had packed so carefully for a trip that no longer belonged to me. The irony wasn't lost on me as I hung my dresses back in the closet, neatly placing my shoes on the shelf, shoes meant to walk the cobblestone streets of Paris. Still, the buzzing continued, my mom's name flashing repeatedly on my screen, followed by an onslaught of texts. Celeste, what's going on? The hotel won't let us check in. The reservation is missing. Call me immediately. Then another. Celeste, this isn't funny. Fix this now. A laugh bubbled up in my throat before I could stop it. Fix this? After everything, they still expected me to swoop in and save the day? My phone vibrated again, this time with a call from Serena. I let it ring out, listening as her voicemail popped up. Celeste, this is so petty, she snapped, her voice laced with entitlement. We're stuck here because of you. You need to call the hotel and fix it now. I rolled my eyes and deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. For years, I had been their fixer, the one who smoothed over every mistake and picked up the slack whenever Serena needed bailing out. Not anymore. Eventually, I answered, if only to end the incessant calls. The moment I picked up, my mother's furious voice crashed into me like a tidal wave. Celeste, what did you do? The hotel says the reservation was canceled and none of the tours are booked anymore. I let her rant, waiting until she ran out of breath, then replied coolly, I canceled them. A stunned silence filled the line before she hissed. Why would you do that? I scoffed, my patience finally snapping. Oh, I don't know, maybe because you decided to take Serena on my trip? You're lucky I even drove you to the airport. We thought you'd understand, she snapped, her voice sharp with frustration. Understand what? I shot back, my tone rising. That 2 years of saving, planning, and effort meant nothing because Serena needed a break? That my hard work was disposable the moment she decided she wanted it? No, Mom, I don't understand, and I don't care to. Without waiting for a response, I hung up and turned off my phone, tossing it onto the couch. The silence that followed was blissful. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. If they wanted to prioritize Serena, they could figure out the rest of the trip without me. But the silence only lasted a day. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing again, more calls, more messages, and this time I was in no rush to answer. At first I ignored them, spending the day cleaning, catching up on work, and relishing the silence. But by evening, curiosity got the better of me. I braced myself as I unlocked my phone and scrolled through the flood of messages. Celeste, you've gone too far. Your sister is in tears, and your father is furious. We can't get into any of the hotels you booked. That was from my mom. You're acting like a child. I don't get why you're making this such a big deal. Just fix it already, Serena whined. And finally, from my dad, we need to talk. This isn't right. I shook my head, setting the phone down. For years, I had been the one to fix things, to ensure everyone was comfortable, happy, and taken care of. Now that I had removed myself from the equation, they had no idea how to handle it. I poured a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, letting my anger simmer. How dare they act like I was the one in the wrong? How dare they expect me to clean up their mess after treating me like I was disposable? The next call came minutes later, and this time I answered. Celeste, my mother barked before I could even say a word. This isn't funny anymore. We're stranded. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? I took a slow sip of my tea, savoring the shift in power. Embarrassing? I echoed. Try saving for years, planning every detail, and then being told you're not even part of the trip you paid for. Oh, stop being dramatic, she snapped. Serena needed this more than you. And now, I said, my voice cool and firm, she can figure it out. You made your decision, Mom. You wanted to take Serena instead of me? Fine. But don't expect me to fund her vacation. We're family, she hissed. We don't do this to each other. I let out a bitter laugh. Funny, I said. I was just thinking the same thing. In the background, Serena's voice rang out, full of irritation. Mom, just hang up on her. She's being impossible. That was the final straw. I exhaled sharply, any remaining restraint slipping away. Enjoy your trip, I said icily. Oh wait, you can't. Because it's not your trip. It was mine. And now it's nobody's. Goodbye. I hung up before she could respond and immediately turned my phone off. For the rest of the evening, I felt an odd mixture of anger and relief. Anger that they had put me in this position, but relief that, for the first time, I had stood up for myself. They could call me dramatic all they wanted. For years, I had let them walk all over me. Not anymore. The next few days were blissfully quiet. With my phone off, I finally had space to breathe, free from their guilt trips and manipulations. Mornings were spent sipping coffee on my back porch, enjoying the calm I had craved for so long. Afternoons were dedicated to work and long-neglected projects, things that reminded me how capable I was when I wasn't drowning under their endless demands. But by the third day, curiosity tugged at me again. I turned my phone back on and was immediately met with over a dozen voicemails. The first few were from my mom, her voice growing increasingly frantic. "Celeste, you need to call me back right now. This has gone too far. I can't believe you're doing this. You've humiliated us. We're your parents. How could you treat us this way?" Then came Serena, her entitled tone as grating as ever. "This is so petty, even for you. You're ruining everything. Just fix it, Celeste." And finally, my dad's voice, softer but no less pointed. "Celeste, I don't understand what's happened to you. Call us back so we can sort this out." I hesitated before playing the final voicemail, my mother's voice now quiet, laced with exhaustion and bitterness. "Celeste," she sighed. "We're back at the airport now. The trip is ruined, and I hope you're happy with yourself. Your sister is devastated, and your father and I are." The message cut off. I stared at my phone, waiting for the guilt to creep in. But it didn't. Instead, I took another sip of my coffee and smiled. "Well, disappointed doesn't even begin to cover it. Call us when you're ready to talk." That was the last voicemail from my mom before I deleted them all without replying. I wasn't ready to talk, and honestly, I didn't know if I ever would be. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was the culmination of years of being pushed aside, of Serena always coming first and me being expected to accept it with a smile. As the hours passed, I found myself reflecting on every holiday where her whims dictated the plans, every family gathering where my accomplishments were treated as afterthoughts, every time I had quietly stepped back to let her shine. This trip had been the final straw, but the cracks had been forming for years. That evening, Isla stopped by unannounced, carrying 2 cups of coffee and an unmistakable look of curiosity. "I heard about what happened," she said, setting one of the cups in front of me. "Your mom called me yesterday." Of course she had. My mom had always been good at recruiting allies when she wanted to guilt me into compliance. "And?" I asked, bracing myself. Isla shrugged, a sly smile creeping across her face. "I told her you were probably busy and would get back to her when you were ready." A genuine laugh escaped me as I shook my head. "You're the best." "No," she said, her tone turning serious. "You are. Because you finally stood up for yourself. I know how hard that is, Celeste. Don't let them drag you back down." Her words lingered in my mind long after she left. Isla was right. I had spent too long bending over backward to please people who never acknowledged my efforts. It was time to break that cycle once and for all. By the weekend, a strange sense of clarity settled over me. The anger still simmered beneath the surface, but alongside it was something else: freedom. Freedom from their endless expectations. Freedom from being the family's fixer. Freedom to finally live on my own terms. But of course, the silence didn't last. It was Sunday afternoon when my phone rang again, and this time I decided to answer. My dad's voice came through, heavy with weariness. "Celeste, your mom wanted me to call. She thinks you'll listen to me." I leaned back in my chair, unfazed. "Go on." He sighed. "Look, this has all gotten out of hand. Your mom's upset, Serena's furious, and well, it's just a mess. But you're better than this." His words ignited a fresh wave of anger. "Better than what, Dad? Standing up for myself? Refusing to let you walk all over me again?" "That's not what I meant," he said quickly. "It's just, you've always been the reasonable one. The one who keeps everything together. This isn't like you." A short, bitter laugh escaped me. "You're right. It's not like me. Because for once, I'm not bending over backward to clean up your mess." He hesitated, and for a fleeting moment I thought he might actually listen, might finally see my side of things. But then his voice turned pleading. "You're punishing the whole family over one decision. Is that really fair?" "Fair," I repeated, my voice rising. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you and Mom decided I wasn't important enough to be part of the trip I planned? Was it fair when you replaced me with Serena like I didn't even matter?" "That's not what we were trying to do," he insisted, his tone defensive. "We just thought Serena needed it more." "Of course you did. I snapped. You always think she needs more attention, more support, more of everything, and I'm always the one expected to sacrifice for her. Not anymore. Silence stretched between us, heavier than it had ever been. Finally, he exhaled. I don't know what you want me to say. I closed my eyes, steadying myself. I don't need you to say anything, I replied, my voice calm. My decision already made. I just need you to understand that I'm done being the afterthought. From now on, I come first. Goodbye, Dad. I ended the call, my hands trembling as I set the phone down. The weight of years of resentment, of always being second to Serena, pressed down on me, but for the first time, I felt something different, relief. I wasn't the family's fixer anymore, and I wasn't going to be. They could figure out how to clean up their own messes. When my parents and Serena finally returned from their disastrous trip, I was already waiting for them at their house. Sitting on the porch swing, sipping coffee, I watched their taxi pull up, their exhausted, irritated faces a sight to behold as they dragged their suitcases up the driveway. Serena was the first to speak, her tone sharp and accusatory. Well, I hope you're happy, Celeste. I raised an eyebrow but didn't move. Happy about what? Our trip was a disaster, my mom snapped, waving her hand as if to erase the entire week. We had to stay in dingy hotels, eat terrible food, and don't even get me started on the tours, Serena huffed, arms crossed. Oh wait, there weren't any. Do you know how embarrassing it was to show up and be told there was no reservation? I took another slow sip of my coffee, letting their words hang in the air before answering, my voice calm. Sounds rough. But, hey, you wanted to take Serena, right? I'm sure you all had some great bonding time. My mother's face twisted with frustration. That's not the point. You knew we couldn't afford everything you had planned. You set us up to fail. I stood up, setting my mug down on the table beside me. No, Mom, I didn't set you up for anything. I planned a trip for the three of us. I spent years saving, organizing, making sure it was perfect. And you decided to cut me out at the last second. So tell me, why on earth would I fund a vacation I wasn't even invited to? My dad sighed, his tone quieter but no less pointed. You didn't have to cancel everything, Celeste. That was extreme. I folded my arms, my patience wearing thin. Was it? You really think I should have paid for you all to have a luxury vacation while I sat at home? If Serena needed this trip so badly, maybe you should have planned it yourselves. Frankly, you're lucky I didn't cancel the return flight. Serena rolled her eyes dramatically. You're so dramatic, it's just money, Celeste. Something in me snapped. And you're so entitled, I shot back, my voice firm. Do you have any idea how much work and sacrifice went into planning that trip? Or do you just assume everything magically appears for you because someone else always takes care of it? The silence that followed was deafening. My mother opened her mouth, but I cut her off. I've spent years being the responsible one, the one who fixes things, plans things, makes sure everything runs smoothly. And you've spent just as long taking me for granted. That's not fair, my mom started, but I held up a hand. No, Mom, what's not fair is how you treated me. You chose Serena over me, like always. So I chose to stop being your doormat. You didn't want me on the trip? Fine. But you don't get to enjoy the benefits of my hard work without me. I grabbed my bag from the porch swing and turned toward my car. I'm glad you're back safely, but don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I'm done. As I walked away, I heard them calling after me, their voices a mix of anger and guilt. But I didn't look back. For years, every visit to that house had left me feeling small, drained, unseen. But this time I felt light. I had finally spoken my truth, and for once, I didn't care how they reacted. As I drove home, the weight that had always pressed against my chest was gone. I was free. When I got back home, I made a cup of tea and sank into the couch, replaying the confrontation over and over in my mind. They had been so sure I would fold, that I would cave the way I always had. But watching their stunned faces as I walked away had been the clearest reminder of how much I had changed. Let them be angry, let them feel hurt or embarrassed, it didn't matter anymore. I was done twisting myself into shapes that fit their expectations. The next day my phone buzzed with a call from Grace. How'd it go? She asked without preamble. I let out a laugh, leaning against the kitchen counter. Exactly, like you'd imagine. They're furious, Serena's pouting, and Mom is probably coming up with a new guilt trip to drag me back into line. Grace snorted. Let her try. You've got a backbone now, and I'm here to make sure it stays in place. I grinned, warmth filling my chest at her unwavering support. Thanks, Grace, I mean it. You've been my rock through all of this. Anytime, she said, her voice softening. So, what's next for you, now that you're not playing family fixer anymore? That question had lingered in the back of my mind since the confrontation. For years, my life had revolved around trying to please my family, earning their approval, shaping myself around their needs. Now that I had shed that weight, the future stretched before me, wide open, full of possibility, and maybe a little intimidating. I don't know yet, I admitted. But for the first time, I feel like I get to decide. Not them, not anyone else, just me. Sounds like the start of something amazing, Grace said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Over the next few weeks, I started making small changes that felt monumental in their own way. I redecorated my living room, replacing the outdated hand-me-down furniture from my parents with pieces that actually felt like me. I spent weekends wandering through hidden cafes and parks, finally exploring the city on my own terms instead of through someone else's schedule. I started journaling, writing down my thoughts, my goals, my dreams, free from the constraints of what I had once thought I should want. Every step, no matter how small, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I hadn't realized I had lost. Then, one evening, I sat down with my laptop and opened the spreadsheet I had used to meticulously plan the trip that never happened. The canceled reservations stared back at me, but instead of regret, I felt something else: determination. That money had been meant for a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I wasn't about to let it go to waste. With a deep breath, I closed the spreadsheet and opened a new browser tab, typing solo travel ideas. A few weeks after my parents returned, I booked a solo trip to Italy. It wasn't the same itinerary I had planned for them, and it wasn't about proving a point anymore. This was for me, a chance to embrace my independence, to celebrate the freedom I had fought for. The moment I stepped off the plane in Rome, a rush of excitement and nervousness filled me. I had never traveled alone before, but as I stepped into the lively streets of the Eternal City, I knew I had made the right decision. My days were filled with wandering through cobblestone alleys, marveling at ancient ruins, and savoring long, unhurried meals at charming cafes. There was no schedule, no compromises, no one else to accommodate, just me, moving through the world at my own pace. One afternoon, while sitting on the Spanish steps with a gelato in hand, I pulled out my journal and started writing. For years, my goals had always been shaped by making someone else happy. But now, as I put pen to paper, something shifted. Learn a new language, start a small business, travel to at least 5 more countries. The list grew, each dream a reflection of the life I wanted to create, not the one I had been expected to live. On my last night in Florence, I had dinner at a small family-run restaurant overlooking the Arno River. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, a deep sense of peace settled over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for permission to live the way I wanted. I had taken control, and the future was mine to write. Trip had been more than just a vacation, it was a turning point. I had spent so much of my life chasing my family's approval, but here, thousands of miles away, I realized I didn't need it. I was enough, just as I was. When I returned home, my parents tried to reach out again, their messages softer, more measured. "Hope you had a nice trip," one text from my mom read. "Maybe. We can all talk soon?" I stared at the message, then set my phone down. I wasn't ready to reply, and for the first time, that was okay. This time, any conversation would happen on my terms. As I unpacked, placing souvenirs from my solo adventure on my shelves, a quiet sense of pride settled over me. A week later, my phone rang again, my mom. This time, I answered. "Hi, Celeste," she began, her voice unusually soft. "How was your trip?" "It was amazing," I replied evenly, keeping my emotions in check. "That's good to hear," she said, pausing as if carefully choosing her next words. "We've been thinking a lot about what happened. Maybe we handled things poorly." The admission surprised me, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easily. "Poorly?" I repeated. "You replaced me on a trip I planned and paid for without even asking." "Poorly is an understatement." "I know," she admitted. "Your dad and we didn't realize how much it would hurt you." I exhaled sharply. "And Serena? Does she feel bad too, or is she still blaming me for ruining her vacation?" A silence stretched before my mom sighed. "She's upset," she finally said. but I think she knows she could have handled things better. I leaned against the counter, my grip tightening around the phone. Mom, this wasn't just about the trip. It's about years of putting her first, expecting me to pick up the slack, assuming I'd be okay with being second place. I'm not doing it anymore. A pause, then a quiet, I understand. We're going to try to do better. We don't want to lose you. The words tugged at something deep inside me, but I had learned enough not to let guilt dictate my choices. I'm glad to hear that, I said carefully. But it's going to take more than words to fix this. I need to see real effort, not just apologies. You will, she promised. We'll give you the space you need, but I hope you'll let us back in someday. After the call, I felt a tangle of emotions, relief that they were finally acknowledging their behavior, but skepticism over whether they would actually change. But that night, as I wrote in my journal, I realized something crucial. Whether they changed or not wasn't my responsibility. Over the following months, I held firm to my boundaries. I responded to calls and messages when I wanted to, not out of obligation. I didn't rush to fix things or smooth over conflicts. Instead, I poured my energy into building a life that truly felt like mine. I signed up for a photography class, something I had always dreamed of but never made time for. I joined a local hiking group, discovering a love for early morning trails and the quiet peace of being surrounded by nature. And I even started planning my next solo trip. Not to prove a point, but because I wanted to. With every new experience, every decision I made for me, I reclaimed a part of myself that I had unknowingly given away over the years. One evening, sitting on my porch and watching the sunset paint the sky in soft pinks and oranges, I let the moment sink in. I had come so far, from the girl who bent over backward for people who didn't appreciate her, to a woman who valued herself, set boundaries, and refused to shrink to fit someone else's expectations. I had thought the trip to Italy would be the destination, the resolution I had been searching for, but it wasn't. It was just the beginning. I wasn't waiting for permission to live my life anymore. I was free.